What comes to mind when you hear the term maternal mortality? For me, I have always pictured a white American mother in an American hospital surrounded by doctors where everyone is working to save this mother's life just to keep everything healthy and things like that. And unfortunately, she passes away because the doctors could not do enough to save her. Sadly, maternal mortality hardly ever looks like this. It is much more brutal, much more disease, and it doesn't usually happen as often in America as it does in poverty-stricken areas such as sub-Saharan Africa. Um, Maternal mortality is one of the world's leading causes of non-natural deaths. Unfortunately, most of us are completely unaware of what is going on, and for those of us who do know what is going on, we feel bad, yet we fail to take any action and do something about this issue. In this speech, I will give an example of what maternal mortality looks like in its rawest form, give you some of the statistics of these rates, and then lastly explain why some of these things are occurring. While I tell you these things, I hope you can all begin to understand that maternal mortality is a serious issue and that these women are in need of a voice and a helping hand. Although it would be amazing if all of you would go out and attempt to make a difference for these women, that is not exactly the main goal of my speech. What I truly want you to take away from my speech today is to be persuaded to see that these women, although we may not directly be affected by their deaths, are suffering horrible deaths that can be prevented. So for my first point, I'm going to tell the story of Mahabamba. I retrieved this story from the HuffingtonPost.com. This young girl, at age 10, was sold to a 60-year-old man for $10. He used her as his second wife and simply just used her for sex on the side of his own marriage. By the age of 13, she became pregnant and actually ran away to protect her baby from this lifestyle. Surviving by herself, she had no money. She could not afford a midwife to help her give birth to her baby. She tried giving birth by herself, but unfortunately her pelvis had not grown large enough and the baby's head could not fit through. The baby's head was stuck in the birth canal for 7 days. She became unconscious. She lost control of her legs and all of her bowel controls, and she ended up dying from disease. This is just one of the many stories that I actually read on this topic, and the stories are very brutal and terrible things are happening to these women. Now that you've seen a story of how these go sometimes, I'm going to give you some of the statistics. According to abcnews.com, sub-Saharan African countries make up for 11% of the world's population. They suffer from a quarter of all of the disease in the world, yet they only receive 1% of the world's healthcare funding. These numbers aren't adding up. 536,000 mothers are dying from maternal mortality each year, which equates to about 1 per minute. Then lastly, there's a rate called the MMR, which is the maternal mortality rate. In the United States, 11 out of 100,000 mothers die from this occurrence, which is not very much. In Sierra Leone, in Africa, over 2,000 out of 100,000 mothers are dying. And then when you add in the fact that in poverty-stricken countries, these women are tending to have more children, the likelihood of them dying while giving birth is even greater. For a woman in Niger, she has a 1 in 7 chance dying during her lifetime while giving birth. And for my final point and most crucial point, I'm going to talk about why these women are dying during childbirth. There are biological and sociological factors. The first biological factor is simply the head of the child and the pelvis of the woman. Sometimes these do not mix together. Fast runners will often have an anthropoid pelvis, which means a smaller pelvis, which it might make it difficult for the baby's head to fit through. The next a sociological factor is lack of schooling. This leads to better contraception. People are going to know that they need to go to hospitals and get the right treatments and better schooling simply. Um, there's a story, I read a story of this girl named Prudence who she was having an obstructed labor and she had a midwife with her, but her midwife was not trained properly. And in order to try to get this baby out, the midwife actually sat on her stomach. And this actually caused the mother to die. Um, so just a lack of schooling, they need better schooling. Um, Another reason is the lack of rural healthcare systems. Hospitals would be more time efficient with these women when they come in and also provide proper antibiotics for them to treat all of their infections. There's a huge shortage of doctors in these poverty-stricken areas. And when people do want to be a doctor, they tend to go to the United States or flock to the bigger cities because that's where they think more patients are going to be. And then they leave these small poverty-stricken villages out in the dust. And then lastly, and most importantly, simply a disregard for women. I have a quote by the UN uh, Secretary General. He says, "Would the world stand by if it were men who were dying for simply completing their reproductive functions?" Studies prove that in countries where women are highly marginalized, maternal mortality rates go up. For example, in the 1920s, American maternal mortality rates were just as high as we see over in Africa today. All of a sudden, medical advancements occurred and women's suffrage took place where women became to vote or were able to vote and their voice became more highly valued. All of a sudden, these rates completely plummet to where they are today. Then lastly, I have a quote from Clinical Obstetrics and Gynecology. They say, "Women are not dying because of untreatable diseases. They are dying because societies have yet to make the decision that their lives are worth saving." This kind of just shows us that change can happen. We just need to get out there and choose to make it happen. In conclusion, today I have given you only a small background on this topic, but I hope that you will be able to see some of these terrible things that are happening and take a stand to fight for these women who cannot fight for themselves. Thank you.